Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Diana Skaya. The Prime Minister of Armenia and the President of Azerbaijan have signed a joint, quote, peace agreement at the White House on Friday in a deal brokered by the United States and to what Donald Trump called historic and said would finally bring 4 decades of conflict to an end. Now international leaders are speaking out, but what really lies ahead for the two countries and who does this deal ultimately benefit? Well, joining me now to discuss the details and what it means for the South Caucasus, I'm joined by George Mchedlishvili, Associate Professor at the European University in Tbilisi. George, welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation.
All right, George. So now this entire deal is being hailed by the Trump administration as a breakthrough peace deal. But I'm going to play this interview a little bit differently. I'm going to name you 6 countries as we go on, and I want you to tell me, as I name you those countries, what you think this peace deal means for each one, whether it benefits and why, or whether it's less of an advantage. Let's begin with Azerbaijan.
Well, for Azerbaijan, this is a solidification and formalization of their gains, of their victories in 2020 and 2023. And of course, it will present the leader Aliyev as the victorious leader. So he will already go down into history as the one who reunited the country, who restored the territorial integrity, something which was the bane and something which was poisoning the existence of every Azerbaijanis from 1994 for about 30 years. And now, so he wants to turn this page in history of these hostilities and tries to unleash the full potential of the South Caucasus. He will present himself as the leader who managed that much. And of course, well, it bodes some benefits from additional benefits from for the South Caucasus in general. And for Azerbaijan itself, this is a very important agreement by weakening the influence of Russia. Azerbaijan and Russia had these lukewarm relations. On the surface, relations were fine. They were okay. They were friends. They were meeting periodically. Baku was one of the few capitals where Putin could go without fearing being caught. Because of this.
But Putin was also able to go to Yerevan also without being caught. I mean, don't forget, Russia has a base in Gyumri in Armenia as well.
Yes, but over the past few years, actually, kind of like he hadn't been in Armenia. So, but I mean, last year, over the past 2 years, it was like Baku, but it was one of the capitals. Well, the relations were fine, but so Azerbaijan was always trying to find the window of opportunity to disentangle itself, like from the dependency on Russia, and well, to help South Caucasus become a fully fledged region. Now there is a real big opportunity because Russia had traditionally been a spoiler.
What about Armenia? How does this deal benefit Armenia?
Well, in general, I think it will benefit because so for many years, the so-called victory which Armenia had, like over Karabakh in obviously it was a fully fledged victory, but it was a Pyrrhic victory because it tied Armenia to Russia. So because of that, like the rule of the Karabakh clan for 20 years, many strategic assets of Armenia were sold to Russia. Russia was holding a very kind of like strong grip like on Armenia. Now this grip is loosening. Russia is busy elsewhere, and there is a big window of opportunity. So the current leader of Armenia and his team are very progressives. Okay, they make mistakes. They make actually sometimes silly statements, but for their mistakes, they have a broad strategic vision that Armenia should integrate into the West, into the civilized world.
What kind of mistakes are you talking about?
Such a big relation, and this is a very good opportunity for them.
George, what kind of mistakes are you talking about the Armenian government? Or is it related to this peace deal, you mean? I mean, let me ask you this. Don't you think
No, generally. Well,
don't you think this peace agreement for Armenia in a way was actually cloaked in concessions as to, you know, also this peace deal? I mean, we don't know much about it, right? Because Armenia and Azerbaijan signed this deal in March, which the details are still not very much out in the open. And also, I want to talk about here. I mean, I know you're talking more about, you know, the advantage and, you know, the economy, and also, you know, you've mentioned the first Karabakh war, right, in 94, and then, of course, Azeri gains in 2020, and then in 2023. But let me ask you this. What about in Armenia? Don't you agree that the peace agreement was actually cloaked in concessions for Armenia? I mean, there is no talk here of, let me ask you this, what happens to the prisoners of wars? What happens now? Azerbaijan asking, Armenia to change its constitution? And 3, what happens to the 120,000 ethnic Armenians that were actually massively, in mass exodus, really had to flee, and Stepanakert, and, Nagorno-Karabakh, or should I say Artsakh, and flee to Armenia proper? What happens to them in this deal? I mean, do we see some kind of peace really amongst the people being able to cohabitate together?
So I believe that this agreement will bring this general spirit of peace and this ability to get reconciled, because there was no mention of the constitutional change in the Washington meeting and beforehand. So for a few weeks, Aliyev hasn't mentioned about that. Mm-hmm. Okay, meaning that he's trying to, maybe help Pashinyan to get the advantage and to win the 2026 elections, because this coming election overshadows every calculus in Armenia, because we see revanchist forces, mostly pro-Russian, and by the way, even those who are formally pro-Russian are supported by Russia. They want to topple Pashinyan. They want actually Pashinyan not to be in politics, because they had a docile, prior to Pashinyan, docile leader. So Pashinyan is really kind of in this regard, in a way, visionary. Now about these 120,000 people. Of course, it is very sad, but it should be also put in perspective. It was in 1992-94, we saw 750,000 Azerbaijanis being ethnically cleansed, and the way they were ethnically cleansed was much harsher than this time. Well, by the way, people in Nagorno-Karabakh, they were offered Azerbaijani citizenship or, the ability to live, which most of them did.
And do you honestly believe that Armenians would have been do you honestly believe that they thought, after all the killings that took place, after all the, we saw some gruesome videos of Azerbaijani military decapitating Armenian citizens living in Nagorno-Karabakh. Do you think that they were able to actually believe that they were able to live in, in peace with them and being offered this, right? But that's besides the point. Let me ask you this. I want to switch you onto this corridor. That's another, George, that's for another day, for another talk. We're getting into history now. I want to ask you about this corridor, the Zangzour Corridor, which now will supposedly be called the Trump route for international peace and prosperity. So now there's talks about who will be controlling it. Talks about that should take place next week, reportedly. But now, leaders are speaking out, and the first country that's really speaking out against is, of course, Iran, threatened to block the planned transport corridor. Of course, this is, its shared border with Armenia, of course, linking to Georgia. What can you tell me about this corridor? Why is Iran not happy about this? Why does Iran say it feels threatened about it?
Because it basically cuts off Iran from this access to the region and from potential of the region as a transportation hub. Because there was talk about north-south route, right? From Russia through Azerbaijan to Iran. Now the middle corridor is taking over, which is a generally very good news for European Union and for the general kind of Eurasian peace and Eurasian trade. Obviously, they resent it, but at the moment they can hardly impede, because they're still licking their wounds after this Israeli and U.S. bombings. Now, this is also, I believe that the timing of that deal, or maybe kind of pre-signing of the deal, and this involvement of the United States is good, because it is the period when both Russia and Iran are pretty weak. So Russia tried to actually put up a good face, even though obviously they cannot be satisfied with this deal, because their statement was relatively muted. But today there is a window of opportunity, because both Russia and Iran, major spoilers, the countries which want to see South Caucasus fragmented and weak, are too busy elsewhere, and there's a window of opportunity. That's why there are, all these talks, which are of course super important, about actually kind of the prisoners of war, about actually people returning. But I believe that strategically they're today secondary to this general deal about turning the page and making South Caucasus a fully fledged region. Now there is a big goal, and it is possible. It is within reach to make South Caucasus a fully fledged region like the Baltic states, like the Visegrad countries in Central Europe, which helped a lot these countries actually to integrate in the European Union and like to make their potential actually kind of work. I believe this is today the most important, and other issues could wait, even though, of course, actually kind of they cannot wait actually for too long. But I believe the major steps was made. Most importantly, to break down this mentality of hostility between the people. I think this meeting, the very good, I would say, like body language and very good attitudes of the leaders, and kind of they underline their like positive attitude toward each other. I think they can go a long way in actually kind of finally breaking this actually kind of like mentality of the other being enemy. Of course, it takes much more than that, but there are important steps.
George, you're interestingly saying that it takes a lot and a long time to break this mentality. But let me ask you this. So how do you envision the day after to look like? Say this deal, this quote unquote peace deal, if that's what we can call it, depending on who. Of course, I mean, I do believe that Turkey will also benefit greatly from this, right? We didn't talk about how it's going to benefit Turkey. And let's not forget, right, this route, the Zangzour route, right, it will pass through, about to build it from Azerbaijan to link Nakhichevan and to ultimately lead to Kars and into Turkey, right? So here we also have, let's be reminded, you're saying it's going to benefit also, but the United States and all, but let's not forget it's also, bringing about this Turkic and this also pan-Turkism world, if that's what we can call it as well. But how do you envision, just very briefly, because we're almost out of time, the day after? How do you envision this?
Well, this is tough because, there is an unfortunate elephant in the room, which is Russia. We do not know what will they do. Obviously, so far they are relatively calm because kind of they're too much bogged down in Ukraine and don't have much of the wherewithal, financial and military, to impede it. But obviously they're super unhappy. I think if this first of all, it's not a deal yet. It was actually a pre-deal. It was actually tabled. Still many issues, technical issues, have to be resolved, about actually customs union, whether Azerbaijanis will be informing Armenians who is actually passing about goods and people, what companies in the United States will be actually responsible for this for operation of this of the Zangzour Corridor. So, there are still important issues actually to be settled. And of course, usually this political forecast and geopolitical forecast is not very, I would say, grateful affair because there are many, I would say, unpredictable situations. Well, who knows what will happen, how Russia will behave, how Turkey-Armenia relations actually kind of will continue. Because for me, it is a huge potential, because even more important than Armenia-Azerbaijan is if the border between Armenia and Turkey finally opens, it will be huge game changer. It will make Russia really irrelevant. Totally irrelevant in the region, which I think this is the main goal of the South Caucasus. Of course, for me as a Georgian citizen.
Thank you so much, George Mchedlishvili, Associate Professor at the European University in Tbilisi, for breaking it down for us here this morning.
Thank you.
And that's all for this edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching.